Hey there. Tonight, we step into the firelit breath of Earth itself, into the mouths of volcanoes that some believe guard forgotten worlds. Imagine standing at the edge of a crater as the ground shakes beneath your feet, the air trembling with heat, the sky split open by smoke. People call it destruction. They call it chaos. But I've always wondered, what if the fury of volcanoes wasn't only an ending, but also a seal, a lock, a burial place for something far older than us? The idea first reached me not through textbooks or myths, but through silence. The kind of silence that falls in villages built on volcanic slopes. You see the cracked stones of abandoned homes, the outlines of stairways that lead to nowhere, and you feel it in your bones. Something was lost here, something hidden in fire and ash. Legends murmur about gods who demanded offerings, about worlds swallowed whole. But what if those weren't metaphors? What if they were memories? The ancient islanders of Santorini told of a city beneath the sea, drowned when the earth shook and the mountain erupted. In Iceland, stories speak of fire giants chained beneath the earth, rising when the volcanoes roar. And in Java, whole kingdoms vanished beneath flows of molten rock, leaving behind statues half submerged in frozen rivers of stone. These stories echo across continents, carried by people who had never met, whispering the same truth. Volcanoes are not just natural events, they are gates and perhaps tombs. What strikes me most is how carefully the human mind preserves terror. Thousands of years later, we still remember names like Vesuvius, Tambora, Krakatoa, syllables that hold more weight than the dates of kings and empires. We remember not the rulers, but the mountains that swallowed their people. Could it be because those mountains buried more than just lives? Could they have sealed away the cities themselves, locking entire civilizations in molten coffins beneath the earth? It isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Archaeologists uncovered Pompeii almost intact, a world frozen mid-step by volcanic ash. But what if Pompeii is only the surface of a deeper mystery? What if there were entire cultures, older than recorded history, whose tombs lie undisturbed beneath layers of volcanic rock we've never pierced? Every eruption might not just be the end of a chapter, it might be the closing of a book we haven't even opened yet. And I confess, I've walked too close to those places. I've stood on slopes where locals refuse to farm, where the ground feels hollow underfoot, where they say lights flicker beneath the soil on nights when the moon hides. They tell stories in hushed tones, of tunnels carved before their ancestors arrived, of chambers sealed with rot, of echoes that don't belong to the mountain, but to something buried inside it. When I listened, I didn't laugh, because in those moments, with the heat rising from beneath, and the air too still to trust, I felt as if the earth itself was remembering. So tonight, as we begin this journey into fire and shadow, I want you to ask yourself, what if volcanoes are more than geological scars? What if they are the world's most secret vaults, hiding the remnants of civilizations we were never meant to find? I felt that question burn in me most deeply when I came across an account, hidden in the notes of a 19th century traveller who swore he saw carved steps descending into the lava fields of Etna. He wrote of markings on stone that looked like letters, blackened but still legible, before they vanished in another eruption. His words were dismissed as fevered imagination, yet I can't forget them. Because if they were real, then the volcano itself was not just a destroyer but a keeper. And so I wonder, if volcanoes are keepers, what exactly have they been guarding all this time? That thought followed me long after I left the mountain slopes, like an ember lodged behind my ribs. The more I travelled, the more I found that every volcanic land carries not just stories of eruptions, but echoes of something hidden beneath. It was as if whole cultures had woven their warnings into folklore, leaving behind faint trails that pointed toward the same unsettling idea, that the earth was not finished swallowing. Take the legends of Hawaii. The people there spoke of Pele, the goddess of fire who demanded respect lest she cover villages in rivers of flame. Most dismissed her as myth. Yet when I stood near Kilauea, I thought of something else. Myths are rarely just imagination. They are often memory, shaped into story. What if Pele wasn't only a spirit of destruction? What if she was a remembrance of a people who vanished, a coded warning passed down so the living would not dig too deep where the buried still sleep? And it wasn't only in Hawaii. In Central America, ancient records from the Zapotecs mention temples swallowed by the fire that comes from below. In Japan, there are tales of whole districts devoured by Mount Unzen, where monks once claimed to hear chanting from beneath the cooled rock years after the eruption. Across the world, the refrain repeats, volcanoes don't just destroy, they conceal. But conceal what? That question pulled me into archives, where I found a reference so strange it kept me awake for nights. A Jesuit missionary in the 1600s wrote from the Philippines about villagers who guided him to a fissure near Mount Mayon. There, he said, stood a stone doorway, blackened but distinct, half buried in hardened lava. The villagers told him it was the entrance to the city of the sleeping ones, and that those who tried to break it open never returned. His superiors dismissed the letter as pagan superstition, yet the description was so precise it left little room for invention. A doorway, locked in lava, could it have been real? I can almost hear the scepticism. It's easy to say stories bend with time, that heat and stone play tricks on the imagination. But ask yourself this: why does the same theme appear in cultures that never spoke to each other? Why do mountains of fire across the globe carry tales of swallowed cities, sealed halls, or voices beneath the stone? Either humanity has an obsession with imagining the same nightmare, or they are all remembering pieces of the same buried truth. Sometimes I think about how fragile our own cities are. A single eruption could erase everything we've built in days, reducing concrete to ash, glass to sand, leaving behind no more trace than the hollow impressions archaeologists marvel at in Pompeii. Imagine if it happened not once in history, but many times. Entire civilizations entombed in magma, compressed into silence, until only fragments of myth carried them forward. Would we even know they had existed? Or would their bones and monuments remain locked away, mistaken for nothing more than the mountain's own making? I remember walking along the base of Etna on another journey, guided by an old shepherd who insisted there were sounds at night that no man should hear. He told me of times when the volcano was quiet, but a low vibration trembled in the rock like drums behind thick walls. He swore the mountain wasn't empty, but filled with chambers where voices still moved, waiting. I didn't believe him entirely, but neither could I laugh, because in that stillness, with only the wind brushing ash across the ground, I thought I felt it too. That hollow resonance, as if something vast lay breathing beneath. If all these stories hold even a grain of truth, then volcanoes are not merely wounds of the earth. They are vaults, but vaults are built to contain something, and the deeper question is, who placed it there? That question is the one that refuses to leave me, the one that hums like molten stone beneath the surface of every story I've collected. If volcanoes are keepers, then someone or something chose them as keepers. Could it have been nature itself burying its own mistakes? Or was it a people so advanced that they understood the violence of fire not as an ending, but as a form of preservation? The more I consider it, the more I feel we are circling the edges of something vast, a possibility that makes recorded history look like a fragment of a longer hidden epic. In the highlands of Mexico, I spoke with a historian who insisted that early Mesoamerican peoples built temples on volcanic slopes not to worship, but to remember. She told me of symbols carved into obsidian fragments, showing what looked like stairways vanishing into flames. They knew, she whispered, that before them there had been others. They knew the fire swallowed entire nations. Her words unsettled me. not because of what they claimed, but because of the way she said them, not as theory, but as certainty. Across the ocean, in Sicily, I stumbled upon a story so strange it blurred this line between legend and confession. An old manuscript, hidden away in a monastery, described Etna not as a volcano, but as a fortress of the sleeping kings. It claimed that beneath the mountain lay halls of stone, where golden masks rested on the faces of rulers entombed by choice. The monks copied it in silence, adding only one chilling note: their time has not yet ended. And then there is the science, or rather the cracks where science falters. Geologists sometimes find anomalies deep within cooled lava flows, voids and cavities where the stone doesn't behave as it should, as if something once occupied the space before it hardened. They call it natural irregularity. But what if it is architecture? What if those cavities are not empty accidents, but the shadows of rooms, walls, or even entire structures erased yet not erased enough? I think often about the psychology of erasure. When we lose something, our minds grasp for fragments, for hints that it might still be there. Humanity does the same. We collect myths. We preserve whispers of swallowed lands, because some part of us refuses to accept that the past is gone without trace. What if those myths aren't delusions of memory, but signals? What if the human instinct to remember through story is the only way civilizations long dead still call out to us from beneath the stone? Yet here lies the unsettling turn. If these worlds were buried deliberately, then maybe they were not meant to be found. Think of it. A people sealing their greatest creations inside the most dangerous vaults on Earth. Why? Was it desperation? A last attempt to preserve themselves from catastrophe? Or was it a warning? An attempt to lock away something that should not resurface? The thought chills me more than any eruption could, because what lies beneath may not be a treasure, it may be a threat. I remember one night on the flank of Stromboli, staring down at the sea as the volcano hissed behind me. The local fisherman beside me said words I'll never forget. The mountain keeps them quiet. If it ever opens fully, they won't be quiet anymore. He wouldn't say who they were. His eyes avoided mine, fixed instead on the restless glow in the sky, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't speaking in metaphor. So the question deepens. If volcanoes are vaults, if they are tombs, then are they keeping secrets safe for us? Or keeping us safe from them? That distinction is everything. If volcanoes are mere keepers of treasure, then their silence is benevolent, a hidden library of civilizations waiting for us to rediscover. But if they are locks, if they are barriers designed to hold something back, then digging too deeply might not reveal glory. It might awaken what should never be stirred. The unsettling thought is that both could be true. What one age saw as salvation, another might see as prison. And what we mistake for natural fire might in truth be the earth itself defending us from something older than time. The first major twist came to me in a way I never expected. I was studying volcanic strata near the Mediterranean when a geologist handed me a core sample, pulled from layers deep within hardened basalt. To the naked eye, it was just rock, black, compressed, ancient. But under magnification there was something embedded, a line, too straight to be natural, too precise to be chance. It looked like the edge of worked stone, buried under millions of years of eruptions. It's probably a coincidence, the geologist said with a shrug. Yet his eyes betrayed unease. He had seen it too. The geometry that shouldn't have been there. From that moment, history itself felt unstable. If structures truly lie beneath volcanic rock, then the timeline we cling to may be far thinner than we believe. The Earth is vast enough to swallow whole civilizations without leaving us a trace, but sometimes a trace remains. The straight line in that rock was like a voice breaking through static. Faint but undeniable, it said, Look closer, and I did. I began to notice other anomalies reported and dismissed. Fragments of pottery pulled from volcanic ash, too deep to belong to the cultures we know. Metallic shapes fused into lava that no one could identify. Rumours of tunnels unearthed in eruptions, only to be resealed by new flows of fire. Each story was treated as error, as if history itself was too fragile to allow such evidence. But they haunted me. Why? Because they fit into a pattern. Across continents, the myths, the geology, the whispers all aligned around the same truth. Volcanoes have swallowed more than villages. They have swallowed entire epochs. And if that is true, then our history is less a straight line than a palimpsest, written, erased, and written again, with fire as the eraser. The psychological weight of that realization pressed on me. If civilizations were buried, what does that say about ours? We build with steel and glass, but are we truly safer? Would our memory survive if buried beneath the same relentless stone? Or would we too become myth, a faint echo in the stories of those who might come after, should anything come after? One night in Naples, I asked an archaeologist this very question. She was quiet for a long time before answering. "The ash preserves," she said finally. "It keeps everything exactly as it was, but it also seals. If something is meant to be forgotten, the mountain ensures it is." Her voice trembled on that last word. Ensures. Not erases. Ensures. That word left me shaken. Because to ensure something is forgotten is not nature's role. It is intention. It suggests choice. Design. And so the thought twists again. If volcanoes are the tombs of forgotten worlds, then perhaps those worlds did not vanish by accident. Perhaps they were placed there. And if they were placed there, then the next question becomes inescapable. By whom and for what purpose? The answer to that question is where the world turns sideways. Because history tells us volcanoes erupt blindly, without meaning or plan, yet the evidence whispers otherwise. What if ancient civilizations, or something older still, understood the earth in ways we cannot? What if they chose volcanoes as their vaults precisely because no force on earth seemed stronger, no guardian more final than fire? That possibility reshapes everything we think we know about human origins, about survival, even about what we call extinction. There is a passage in an old Polynesian chant recited only by elders that caught me the first time I heard it. It spoke of the builders who returned to fire, so their voices would not be heard until the stars were right. I remember the shiver that passed through the listeners, not fear exactly, but recognition. They didn't doubt the chant. They carried it as truth, even if no one remembered its source. The idea was clear. A people once walked here, and they hid themselves inside the mountain. For me, that chant was the first undeniable fracture in the story we are told. We speak of progress as a ladder, each age building higher than the last. But what if it is a cycle? What if civilizations rise, burn and vanish, leaving only ash, until one day they are rediscovered, mistaken as beginnings when they were endings? Volcanoes might not only bury worlds, they might recycle them, folding time in on itself until past and future blur. There are fragments of evidence, faint but insistent. In Japan's Era caldera, divers claim to have seen stone steps far below the waves, near where volcanic activity collapsed whole islands. In Guatemala, hardened flows have revealed statues unscorched at their core, as if they were placed there before the eruption, not after. Scientists explain these away as natural formations or coincidence, but my mind keeps circling back. Coincidence doesn't repeat itself with such precision across oceans and cultures. The psychological weight of this grows heavier the longer I carry it. I find myself walking city streets, staring at skyscrapers and wondering what would remain if they were entombed tomorrow. Would future archaeologists find shards of glass and steel and dismiss them as curious but meaningless fragments? Would our own world someday be misinterpreted as myth, reduced to whispers of a forgotten age beneath new layers of fire? But perhaps the most disturbing thought is this. What if the beings who placed themselves in volcanic tombs weren't human at all? If they were another kind of intelligence, older, stranger, then the burial was not a tragedy. It was a decision to seal themselves in fire until some future moment demanded their return. In that light, volcanoes become less like accidents of geology and more like carefully chosen vaults, waiting for keys we do not yet possess. I once asked an elder on the slopes of Vesuvius why his family never left, despite the mountain's danger. His reply was simple, almost chilling. The fire has masters. We stayed to watch the door. When I pressed him, he would say no more. But the look in his eyes was not superstition. It was duty, as though his people's role was not to escape the volcano but to remain near it, guardians of something they refused to name. If this is true, if volcanoes are more than mountains, then they are not only shaping our Earth, they are shaping our destiny. And the question presses harder now. Are we living above tombs that will never open, or vaults waiting for their locks to break? That question is not a whisper anymore. It is a weight that presses into every story, every strange account I've stumbled across. Because once you entertain the idea that volcanoes are not just wounds of the earth, but deliberate tombs, the world around you changes. Every smoking cone, every quiet mountain, every valley shaped by fire becomes something more. A potential doorway, a lock, and locks always suggest keys. It was in the archives of Lisbon where I found a detail that rattled me. A merchant's log from the 1500s spoke of an island in the Atlantic near the Azores that erupted and vanished within weeks. He wrote of flames that rose from the sea and of blackened stone towers visible before they crumbled into the waves. No maps show such a place now. The island is gone. But his words described not raw cliffs of lava, but structures, vertical, precise, unnatural. If his account was true, then that eruption wasn't just fire, it was a burial. And then there are the strange sounds, recorded by volcanologists, dismissed by most as seismic rumblings. Yet when you hear them, when you sit in the dark with headphones pressed close, they do not sound like the random cracking of stone. They sound patterned, rhythmic, almost like voices, low and resonant, speaking from beneath miles of rock. Could we be mistaking language for noise? What if those vibrations are not the earth groaning, but something within it remembering? Everywhere I travelled, I found the same thread. In Indonesia, old men speak of the stone mouths that open when Krakatoa roars, as if the mountain itself is breathing. In Iceland, travellers once claimed to see figures moving in the smoke, silhouettes that vanished when approached. In the Andes, shamans describe dreams of the watchers in the fire who do not sleep but wait. The pattern is impossible to ignore. Too many places, too many echoes, all pointing toward the same unnerving truth. Volcanoes are inhabited, not empty. But by what? That is the question that pulls me into sleepless nights. If the buried are civilizations, then what kind of beings built vaults of fire? Were they like us, desperate to preserve themselves against disaster? Or were they unlike us, choosing fire not as refuge but as concealment? It is easy to imagine treasures locked away, but harder to face the thought that what lies beneath might not be meant to rise again. The deeper I sink into this thought, the more my own psychology rebels. There's a part of me that wants to dismiss it, to cling to the safety of science, to say these are just stories told by frightened people who live too close to mountains that breathe smoke, and yet science itself has blind spots. For centuries, geologists insisted that mountains cannot grow in a single night, until Perixotin rose from a farmer's field in Mexico, erupting into existence where none had stood before. If the Earth can rewrite its surface overnight, then what else might it be capable of concealing? One evening on the flank of Mount Mayon, I watched the lava flow glowing against the dark sky. A guide beside me leaned close and whispered, "Do not call their names." I asked him who he meant, but he wouldn't answer. He only crossed himself and walked away. His fear was not of the eruption, but of something buried inside it. That silence, heavier than the smoke itself, said more than any legend could. So the hook tightens. If volcanoes are tombs, then perhaps they are not dead tombs, but living ones. And the thought that returns to me again and again is this: what happens if one of those locks is opened, not by fire, but by us? That thought has haunted me ever since, because humanity has a habit of opening doors we do not understand. We drill into mountains, carve tunnels through rock, dig for minerals in places where legends warn us away. What if one day, whether by greed or by curiosity, we cut too deep into a mountain that was never meant to be opened? What would we find waiting there, in chambers sealed for millennia, in vaults pressed tight by the molten breath of the earth? There is a story from Papua New Guinea, told to me by a missionary who had lived there for decades. He spoke of miners who drilled into the side of a dormant volcano searching for copper. Days later, the mine was abandoned. Official records say flooding destroyed it, but the locals whispered otherwise. They said the men broke through into a cavern, vast and black, where walls gleamed like polished stone, and in that cavern there were figures, not alive, but not entirely lifeless either. The miners sealed the tunnel themselves before fleeing. The missionary never saw the cavern, but he swore he saw the fear in the men's eyes when they spoke of it. That fear was enough. It unsettles me, because fear is the one thing myths and science share. Even the geologists who dismiss old tales hesitate to linger too long near the mouths of craters. They know how sudden the earth can shift, how fragile the line is between quiet ground and violent eruption. But sometimes I wonder, is there unease about the science, or is it something deeper, something unspoken that humanity has carried for generations? The sense that these places are not just dangerous, but forbidden. And yet, forbidden things are what we seek most. Archaeologists pry open tombs in deserts, divers swim into flooded caves, explorers force their way into mountains. Each time we tell ourselves we are uncovering history, not disturbing it. But what if the things buried in fire are not history to be uncovered? What if they are chapters deliberately struck from the record? The silence of volcanoes might not be an invitation. It might be a warning. I think about Pompeii again, about the plaster moulds of bodies frozen in their last moments. We see them as tragedy, but what if they are also testimony? What if the mountain was not just ending a city, but sealing something inside? Something the people knew about too late. That possibility reshapes their screams into something larger than personal terror. It makes them guardians in their own right, sacrifices to ensure the vault remained closed. The psychological twist of all this is inescapable. I find myself walking city streets, watching smoke curl from chimneys and asking whether, in some future age, a volcano might rise here too, swallowing the towers and the lights, folding us into a tomb we didn't know we were building above. It is not just fear of destruction, it is fear of continuity, of becoming one more buried world stacked beneath the next. The fisherman on Stromboli once told me, "The mountain is not angry, it is patient." I think of those words often, because patience is not the trait of fire, it is the trait of something aware. If the earth is patient, then it waits. But waits for what? For us to awaken what lies within? For time to loosen the locks itself? The possibilities multiply like cracks spreading in stone, and each one is darker than the last. So I return to the same burning hook. If one of these locks were opened, whether by greed, accident, or design, what exactly would step out from the vault of fire to meet us? The mind recoils at the thought, because it is not simply a question of survival, but of recognition. Would what emerged be familiar, echoes of humanity preserved in stone, or would it be something wholly alien, something we could not even name? For centuries we have told ourselves that volcanoes are race. But what if Araya was never the purpose? What if they are incubators, preserving forms, ideas, or even consciousness until the right moment arrives? In the shadow of Mount Merapi in Java, I once spoke to a woman who claimed her grandmother had seen faces in the smoke. Not vague shapes, not tricks of the eye, but faces, detailed and clear, staring back at the living from within the rising ash. When I asked her what they looked like, she did not hesitate. Not human, not animal, something between. That testimony has never left me, because she spoke with a conviction that stripped away doubt. She wasn't telling a story, she was repeating a memory. There are countless accounts like hers. Travellers near Etna in the 18th century wrote of voices echoing in caverns, uncovered by eruptions, voices chanting in languages unknown. In the Andes, shepherds claim to hear songs at night when the volcano is quiet, notes rising through the soil as if the mountain itself were humming. Could these be hallucinations shaped by fear? Of course. But why then are the details so eerily consistent across continents? Why do so many people describe not chaos but order, not noise but music? The possibility chills me more than any eruption ever could, because order implies intent, and intent implies life, or at least memory, waiting. If volcanoes are tombs, perhaps they are not silent tombs at all, but living prisons. The beings sealed inside may not be dead in the way we understand death. They may be dormant, waiting beneath layers of molten rock like seeds buried in earth, waiting for heat to crack their shells. And here lies the heart of my unease. If something is waiting, then it expects to be released. Could it be that eruptions are not accidents of geology, but attempts at return, vaults shaking against their locks, chambers straining to break open? If so, then each eruption is not simply an end for us, but a beginning for them, a beginning delayed again and again by the mountain's patience. Psychologically, the thought is unbearable. Humanity craves certainty, the comfort of believing the ground beneath us is solid. Yet the very landscapes we inhabit whisper of fragility, of hidden doors beneath our feet. We build cities on volcanic slopes, blind to the possibility that we are settling not beside a mountain, but above a crypt. And perhaps one day the crypt will not remain sealed. I think of the miners again in Papua fleeing their discovery. What did they truly see in that cavern? Were those figures remnants of a lost people, petrified in stone? Or were they something else entirely? Something still intact, shielded by the vault of fire? Their silence, their refusal to speak, haunts me more than the legend itself. Silence is not the absence of truth. Silence is the refusal to name it. And so the question sharpens like a blade. If the locks of fire break, what comes forth? A civilization we could embrace, or a force we cannot endure? That is the blade's edge upon which all these stories balance. Civilization is built upon the assumption that the earth beneath us is stable, predictable, charted. Yet when you live long enough in volcanic lands, you realize stability is an illusion, and beneath the illusion is something far older, perhaps even purposeful. To imagine the locks breaking is to imagine history restarting, but not with us as its authors. The possibility of an embrace is tempting. Perhaps within those vaults lie the remnants of civilizations so advanced that their knowledge could transform ours. Maybe they buried themselves with purpose, storing their wisdom where no flood, no war, no passing empire could erase it. And perhaps the eruptions are not warnings, but signals, attempts to push fragments of that lost knowledge back to the surface. Could the artifacts found in hardened lava, the tools fused in molten flows, be breadcrumbs left for us? Or are they merely accidents, evidence of worlds that died screaming, Still, when I let that hope flicker, darkness always follows. Because what if the force sealed within is not wisdom but will? A will we do not recognise, one that regards us not as inheritors but as intruders. The myths of watchers, sleepers and fireborn kings. Could they be more than metaphors? Could they be memories of something that once walked this earth and may yet walk again? I recall an encounter in Chile near Villarica. A young guide, barely 20, told me his grandfather believed the volcano was a prison for giants. He laughed when he said it, but his laughter was thin, stretched over unease. Later that night, he admitted that sometimes when the mountain was restless, his family heard thundering sounds, not explosions, but footsteps. Imagine it. Footsteps echoing beneath miles of stone, as if something vast shifted in its sleep. There's a strange psychology at work when faced with such accounts. The rational mind clings to explanations, tectonic shifts, magma movements, air-escaping vents. But another part of the mind, the part we bury in daylight, recognizes something deeper. Fear. Not of nature, but of presence. Because footsteps are not random. Songs rising from the earth are not chance. Faces in smoke are not coincidence. The repetition of these details across cultures is not noise, it is signal. And signals, by their nature, are meant to be received. But by whom? By us? Or by those who still lie entombed, waiting for recognition? The thought keeps me awake at night. Because if the locks of fire are not permanent, then one day, whether through time, eruption, or our own meddling, they will open. And when they do, the world will not ask if we are ready. The world will only reveal what has been kept from us. I stood once on the rim of Stromboli during a mild eruption. The ground shook beneath me, the sea stretched black and infinite, and from the mountain rose a roar that sounded less like an explosion and more like a voice. Not words, not language, but a vibration that carried weight, intention. For a moment I felt as if I was not standing above the mountain, but listening to something beneath it call out. And the terrifying part was how familiar it felt, as if some part of me already knew the sound, already remembered it. So I return again to the question we cannot shake. When the locks of fire break, do we face ancestors, or something that never considered us part of its story at all? That is the moment the entire narrative twists, because until now I had wondered only whether volcanoes sealed civilizations of the past. But what if what lies within is not the past at all? What if it is something separate from us, something whose story never included humanity, and whose return would not be reunion but replacement? That thought reshapes the question of volcanoes entirely. They are no longer just tombs, they are erasures, they are cages. I think of the writings of Pliny the Younger, who watched Vesuvius consume Pompeii. His description of clouds splitting with strange shapes has been read as panic, as metaphor. But what if he was not writing metaphor? What if what he saw in those clouds was real? A glimpse of what the fire was holding back. The ancients often described volcanoes as mouths, gates, or wounds. Perhaps they chose those words not because of poetry, but because they recognized the truth. Something was sealed within, and sometimes, in eruptions, it almost escapes. Modern science dismisses such fears. Lava, ash, gas, tectonics. All of it is explained, charted, measured. But even scientists admit anomalies. Seismic readings that repeat with uncanny rhythm, frequencies that hum like coded signals, formations inside lava tubes that look less like caves and more like corridors. I've seen those reports buried in appendices, ignored in conferences, treated as curiosities rather than clues. But every one of them whispers the same thing. These mountains are not empty. I recall standing near Hekla in Iceland, known in medieval Europe as the gateway to hell. Pilgrims feared it, monks cursed it, Sailors swore they saw shapes moving in its smoke. Even now, locals avoid its slopes after dusk. When I asked an elder farmer why, he looked at me without hesitation and said, "Because that mountain remembers what we do not." His words lingered in me, heavy with implication. If the mountain remembers, then perhaps what it holds is not forgotten at all, merely waiting to be reintroduced. And here the second great twist sharpens its teeth. The civilizations we think of as destroyed, Pompeii, Santorini, Krakatoa, what if they weren't simply victims of eruption? What if their destruction was part of the sealing, part of the lock being reinforced? The fire didn't just erase them. It buried them alongside what already lay beneath, layering one vault over another, deeper and deeper, like a palimpsest of fire and silence. In that light, the end of those cities was not random tragedy. It was deliberate sacrifice. That possibility leaves me restless at night, because if eruptions are not accidents, but acts of containment, then we are not bystanders in nature's fury. We are part of a cycle of locking and relocking something too vast to remain hidden forever. And that means one day, perhaps soon, our own age will be added to the vault, sealed above the others in another layer of ash. The psychology of such a thought is unbearable. To believe we are fragile is one thing. To believe we are expendable, that is another. If ancient hands, human or otherwise, chose volcanoes as prisons, then perhaps they also chose which civilizations were consumed as part of that prison wall. Were Pompeii, Thera and Java warnings to us, or sacrifices to keep the lock strong? So I must ask the question I dread most. When the locks of fire break, will we be the ones who open them, or the ones consumed to keep them closed? That question is not just about geology, not just about myth. It is about identity. Who are we in the story of this earth? Are we the inheritors of forgotten worlds, chosen to carry forward what others buried? Or are we simply placeholders, destined to be swept away when the mountain decides the lock must be reforged? The more I travel, the more I feel that humanity walks blind across a map, written not in soil or water, but in fire. The weight of this knowledge doesn't just linger in the mind, it seeps into the heart, into the way you see the world. I remember standing in the ruins of Akrotiri on Santorini, staring at frescoes perfectly preserved by ash. The colours were vivid, the images of life vibrant, as though the city had not died, only paused. But what struck me most was not the art itself, but the silence of the rooms. It felt less like a ruin and more like a sealed chamber, as though time itself had agreed to keep their secrets untouched. Looking at those walls, I wondered, were they victims of fire or volunteers to it? That thought began to hollow me. It is one thing to lose a city. It is another to lose the memory of why it was lost. Perhaps the deepest terror of these volcanic tombs is not what they hide, but what they erase. Whole generations lived, loved, and dreamed beneath mountains that swallowed them whole, and now we know them only as shadows. If those civilizations sealed themselves deliberately, then the silence is not tragedy, but choice. A choice to vanish, a choice to lock something away with them. The psychology of carrying that weight is difficult. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if memory itself can be a form of contagion. If we discover what lies beneath, will remembering it doom us as it may have doomed them? Knowledge is power, yes, but power is also danger. History teaches us this in every empire that grew too bold, every kingdom that collapsed under its own reach. And what if what sleeps beneath the volcanoes is not merely knowledge, but the kind of power that bends civilizations until they break? I think often about the phrase whispered by that old man on Stromboli. We stay to watch the door. Guardianship implies duty, but it also implies danger. You don't guard something harmless. You guard something capable of escaping. And that notion claws at me. because it suggests humanity has always known, at least in fragments, that what sleeps beneath is not treasure, but burden, and yet I am torn. What if within those sealed chambers lies the answer to questions we've carried for centuries? The origin of myths, the root of our fears, the spark of our civilizations. What if unlocking the tombs would give us not only truth but transcendence? The temptation is unbearable. To open the vault of fire might mean risking everything, but also discovering who we truly are and what came before us. It is a cruel paradox. The fire keeps us alive by keeping the vaults sealed, but the same fire taunts us with fragments, statues half buried in lava, whispers in seismic waves, frescoes preserved in ash. The mountain conceals and reveals at once, like a keeper who cannot decide whether to protect or to tempt. And we, restless inheritors of curiosity, may not resist the temptation forever. So I circle back to the haunting thought. When the locks of fire are tested, will we prove ourselves guardians of the silence, or the fools who break it? That is the question I cannot shake, the one that circles back no matter how many times I try to ground myself in reason. Because guardianship demands restraint, but humanity has never been good at restraint. We are explorers, conquerors, miners of the deep and climbers of impossible peaks. We pry open tombs even when curses are etched into their stones. We dive into ruins even when legends tell us to stay away. Why should volcanoes be any different? Sooner or later someone will test those locks, and I fear I already know which path we will choose. The fool's path. Curiosity without patience, ambition without pause. Because to us, silence is not sacred. It is a challenge, a void begging to be filled. If the volcano hides something, then surely we will want to expose it, to strip away its mystery, to claim it for ourselves. It is human nature to believe the world's secrets belong to us. But what if this is one secret not meant for our hands? I once spoke with a volcanologist who studied Mount Erebus in Antarctica, one of the rare volcanoes that never truly sleeps. Inside its crater churns a lake of lava, endlessly boiling, endlessly alive. He admitted something I didn't expect from a scientist, that standing near it felt less like observation and more like intrusion. "It watches you," he said quietly, the way an eye watches a trespasser. His words made me shiver, because they echoed the same unease I'd heard in the voices of fishermen, shepherds, shamans and priests across the world. Different lands, different beliefs, yet all shared the same truth. The mountain is not passive. It notices, and if it notices, then perhaps it remembers. Perhaps the locks are not only meant to contain, but to judge those who dare to break them. That possibility reshapes every eruption I've studied. Could it be that civilizations erased in fire were not merely unlucky, but chosen? Not victims of geology, but examples, warnings carved in ash for the rest of us to see. The psychological toll of this thought is heavy. I dream sometimes of walking through cities buried in ash, hearing whispers in languages I do not know but somehow understand. The faces around me are not alive, not dead, but suspended, waiting for something I cannot name. And then I wake with the echo of fire in my ears, as though the dream did not end but followed me back into waking life. I ask myself again and again, what compels us to disturb the silence? Is it arrogance or desperation? Do we dig into these mountains because we cannot bear to think we are alone? Or because some buried instinct draws us to the very things meant to remain sealed? Perhaps the vaults are not only tombs but lures, calling us closer, daring us to test them. And yet the pull is undeniable. I feel it myself. The same urge that drives miners, explorers and archaeologists stirs in me when I stand at the edge of a crater. The silence is unbearable. I want to know. I want to see. Even as I fear what I might find, the desire outweighs the dread. Perhaps that is why humanity cannot help itself, because fear and curiosity are twin flames, and in us, curiosity always burns hotter. So the lock waits, the vault breathes beneath the stone, and we, restless and reckless, circle closer every year. The only question is not if we will test the silence, but when. That inevitability sits like a storm on the horizon. You can feel it in the way humanity presses forward, drilling deeper, climbing higher, never satisfied with the mystery. Sooner or later someone will step too far. Perhaps it will be an innocent dig, a mining expedition, a geothermal project, or an archaeological team chasing a fragment of the myth. Perhaps it will be deliberate, a hand reaching into the fire in search of power. Whatever the cause, the silence will not hold forever. The thought of when consumes me, because timing is not neutral. History has patterns, rhythms, moments when the world seems to echo itself. Civilizations rise, they peak and they fall, often with eerie similarity. What if volcanoes are not random at all, but part of that rhythm? What if each eruption is not chance, but necessity, a reset built into the very skin of the earth? If so, then the when may already be decided. It may not matter what we do. The locks may break on their own. I remember a moment in Guatemala, standing near the volcanic complex of Pacaya. A local elder spoke of cycles. He said every eruption is not just destruction but renewal. The mountain exhales, and the world breathes again. His words were calm, but I heard in them something darker. Renewal implies replacement. If each vault that opens also buries what came before, then the mountain's breath is less a gift than a judgment. And that judgment terrifies me, because it strips away the illusion of permanence. What we call progress might simply be fragments between breaths, a fragile pause between eruptions. Are we living in one of those pauses now, building our towers on borrowed time? If so, then our entire civilization is no more solid than the ash beneath our feet. The psychology of inevitability gnaws at me. To live with danger is one thing. To live knowing that danger is part of a pattern, a rhythm older than humanity itself, that is unbearable. It breeds a kind of quiet dread. The sense that every triumph we achieve is already marked for burial, waiting to be folded into layers of fire and silence. And perhaps that is why myths persist, because people long ago recognized what we refuse to admit, that the earth itself does not just create, it edits. Still, I find myself asking, why lock these things at all? Why bury them instead of letting them vanish completely? If the mountains wished only to destroy, they could. Instead, they preserve. They freeze frescoes in ash, entomb statues in stone, protect fragments of architecture in hardened flows. It is as if the fire both erases and remembers, choosing what to silence and what to whisper forward. That duality unsettles me more than outright destruction, because it suggests purpose. One night on Etna, I spoke to a priest who had lived his life in the shadow of eruptions. He said, "The mountain does not kill blindly, it selects, it decides." I wanted to dismiss his words as faith, as superstition, but they echoed too many others I had heard across the world. The mountain decides, and if it decides, then it watches. If it watches, then it waits. And that thought coils back into the same unanswerable fear. If the locks of fire are meant to break, then perhaps the only thing left to decide is whether we are ready to face what comes through. That readiness is an illusion, of course. How do you prepare for something you cannot define? You can stockpile food for famine, build shelters for storms, even design machines to shield against war. But how do you prepare for a vault of fire cracking open and spilling forth? What? A people? A memory? A force? Even the question defies comprehension, and yet it presses against the edges of human thought, shaping the way we dream and fear. There are nights when I wake in a sweat, convinced I've heard something beneath me, not the rattle of pipes or the settling of walls, but a low vibration, as though the ground itself had whispered. Psychologists would call it projection, a mind carrying its obsessions into sleep. But what if it isn't? What if memory itself is porous? What if the echoes of sealed civilizations seep through the earth, pressing into our subconscious the way magma pushes toward the surface? Perhaps our nightmares are not born within us, but sent from below. I remember once walking with a volcanologist on the slopes of Mount Fuji. He told me something strange, something he admitted only after hours of silence. When I measure the frequencies, he said, sometimes they come in patterns, almost like heartbeat rhythms. His voice was heavy with reluctance, the confession of a man trained to deny such possibilities. A mountain with a heartbeat, a vault that breathes. That image never left me. And then I think of the frescoes in Santorini, the statues in Guatemala, the faces described in Javanese smoke. They are not random. They are too consistent, too deliberate. The world is not merely erasing, it is leaving markers, like fragments of a puzzle meant to be assembled by those reckless enough to try. But who placed those fragments? And why scatter them across continents, across centuries? Could it be that what lies beneath has always been trying to be remembered, or worse, trying to be reborn? The inner conflict tightens here. Part of me longs for the truth, to walk through a chamber carved in stone, to see inscriptions no human eyes have seen in millennia, to know the shape of what was locked away. But another part of me recoils at the thought, because if they were sealed deliberately, then perhaps discovery itself is the danger. The choice to know may be the choice that destroys us. The fisherman's words echo again. The fire has masters. If that is true, then every eruption is not only geology, but governance, the exertion of control by forces we cannot name. And perhaps, when the locks finally break, it will not be random. It will be chosen, timed, orchestrated for reasons beyond our comprehension. If so, then readiness is meaningless. We are not participants, but subjects in a story older than us. It's one thing to lose a home, it's another to lose the memory of it. But the deepest wound of all is to realize that memory itself may have been taken, that our history may be a patchwork built on layers of silence. If volcanoes hold civilizations, then our entire understanding of who we are is fractured. We are not the beginning, nor the pinnacle. We are a brief interlude between vaults. And that truth, if it is truth, leaves me with a thought that gnaws like fire under stone. When the locks finally give way, will we learn who came before us, or will we discover that we were never meant to survive their return? That question burned in me during a night on the flanks of a dormant volcano in the Pacific, a place locals called the Sleeping Gate. The air was still, the stars sharp and unblinking, when I felt a strangeness I cannot quite name. It wasn't the trembling of the earth or the hiss of hidden vents. It was a presence, something just beneath perception, as if the ground itself was aware of me, watching, measuring. And then it happened. At first it was faint, a glow, pale and flickering deep within a crack in the rock. I thought it was a trick of moonlight on glassy stone, but as I stepped closer the glow pulsed, as though in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I froze, unable to move, caught between terror and fascination. The guide who had brought me there tugged at my arm, his face pale in the starlight. "Don't look," he whispered. "They answer when you look too long." His fear was not superstition. It was the fear of one who had seen this before. But I could not look away. The glow brightened, and for a moment I thought I saw shapes moving within it. Not clear, not defined, but shifting, like shadows trying to press through a veil. My skin crawled, and for the first time I truly felt that I stood not beside a mountain, but at the edge of a door. And the door was breathing. The ground shook then, sudden and violent. Rocks tumbled, the air filled with the bitter stench of sulphur, and the glow vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Silence followed, but it was a silence too heavy, too complete. The guide dragged me away without a word, and we did not stop until we reached the village lights below. Only then did he speak. "You should not have seen that. They do not like to be remembered." That night was the midpoint of everything. The moment when the theory of vaults and tombs stopped being abstraction and became something tangible. I had seen it with my own eyes. Whatever lies beneath is not only myth, it exists, it waits, and when it stirs, even the strongest heart falters. The psychological toll of that moment was immediate. For weeks after, I dreamed of the glow, of shadows pressing against stone, of voices just beyond hearing. I began to wonder if memory itself is porous, if by glimpsing them I had let them glimpse me. And that thought, more than any tremor or eruption, left me cold. Because if they can notice us, then perhaps they can also choose when to return. I thought of every civilization buried in fire, every city sealed in ash. What if those weren't just disasters but interactions? What if those who dwell in the vaults decide from time to time to break through, and when they do, the world above pays the price? That thought twisted everything I knew about history. Pompeii, Thera, Krakatoa. Maybe they weren't endings at all, but interruptions, warnings, resets, and so the dread sharpens into one impossible truth. The locks of fire are not passive barriers, they're alive, and when they respond, it is not with chance but with intention. The glow I saw was not an accident, it was an answer, and the question remains, what were they answering to? My gaze, my presence, or something older, a call that has been echoing since before we walked the earth? That question gnawed at me long after I left the mountain, like an ember carried in my chest. The glow had vanished, but its impression lingered, not in the world outside, but in the silence within. I began to wonder if what I had seen was not a response to me, but a reflex to something deeper, something written into the rhythm of the earth itself. Perhaps every tremor, every eruption, every whisper of heat and stone is part of a conversation older than humanity, and perhaps without knowing we sometimes interrupt. The days that followed were slower, filled with a kind of uneasy stillness. I tried to push the memory away, to bury it beneath the comfort of routine. But volcanoes do not let you forget. I heard them in the distance, low rumbles at night, like the faint beat of drums muffled by earth. They unsettled me not because of their volume, but because of their timing. Each came with a pause, as though measured, as though waiting for a reply. In the quiet, small details became unbearable. The hiss of steam rising from cracks in stone, the way the air thickened with sulphur when the wind shifted. Even the silence of birds at dusk felt different, as if they too were listening. I walked among villages built on slopes of ash, their homes clinging stubbornly to ground that could vanish in a single night, and I felt the fragility of it all. These people lived on locks they didn't acknowledge, locks they trusted blindly to hold. I spoke to an elder in one such village, asking him if he feared the mountain. He shook his head slowly. "We do not fear it," he said. "We live with it. Fear makes you run. We must listen instead." Listening. That word struck me. What if the survival of those who live near volcanoes has never been about strength or ignorance, but about tuning themselves to the rhythm of the mountain? They do not defy it. They harmonize with it, knowing that their lives are woven into something larger. And here, the psychology turns sharp. For centuries we in distant cities have mocked such beliefs, calling them superstition, relics of a time when man cowered before nature. But perhaps superstition is not ignorance. Perhaps it is memory, the faint trace of knowledge carried forward when the rest of the world chose to forget. To live near a vault of fire is to inherit fragments of its language, even if you no longer know how to speak it. I began to dream again, not of faces or voices this time, but of doors, endless stone doors, sealed with fire, each one humming faintly as though breathing. I walked among them in the dream, touching their surfaces, and with each touch came a pulse, recognition, like a heartbeat meeting my own. I woke in sweat, shaken not by fear but by the sense of connection, as though the locks knew me, the way I had come to know them. And that realization carved itself into me. Perhaps the mountains are not indifferent. Perhaps they select, choose, and answer. And if they answer, then maybe the glow I saw was not meant for me alone. Maybe it was part of a larger reply to something that has been calling from above, below, or beyond since before we were here to ask questions. So I am left with this slow, unsettling truth. The locks may not only guard, they may also converse. And one day, when the silence breaks, we may realize we were never the only listeners. That thought lingers like smoke in the air after fire. It reshapes the way I move through the world. Every tremor beneath my feet, every shift of wind carrying the scent of sulphur, every distant boom rolling across valleys feels less like chance and more like communication. If we are not the only listeners, then perhaps we are also not the only voices. Perhaps what lies beneath is listening back. I remember sitting in a cafe in Catania, watching Mount Etna loom above the city. The locals spoke of it with the same casual tone one reserves for weather, yet always with a shadow behind their words. "It hears us," a woman said to me unprompted, her eyes fixed on the mountain's smoking crown. "That's why we never speak ill of it." I asked her if she truly believed that. She nodded, but her silence after said more than her words. Belief was not the point. Memory was. The strange psychology of this struck me deeply. If entire civilizations were buried to reinforce these locks, then their descendants may carry fragments of that knowledge without realizing it. Not facts, not clear records, but habits, instincts, the way children inherit the shape of a gesture without knowing its origin. Perhaps the reverence people feel for volcanoes is not superstition at all, but survival encoded in the subconscious, warning them not to forget the mountains are alive. But alive in what sense? That is the question I keep circling. Life as we know it breathes, feeds, reproduces. But what if there are forms of life that do not fit our definitions? What if something can exist in silence, sealed in heat and stone, not dead, not alive, but in waiting? A seed buried too deep to sprout, until the lock is broken. In Hawaii, a storyteller once told me of the hungry ones beneath Mauna Loa, beings who do not age but who stir when people dig too deep. He said eruptions are not random, but answers, the mountain pushing back when disturbed. His words rattled me, not because I believed them fully, but because they resonated with everything I had already heard elsewhere. Different cultures, same theme. The watchers, the sleepers, the hidden ones. And here lies the darker turn. If the silence is shared, then the balance is fragile. We are not the only listeners, but perhaps we are also not the only speakers. What if our drilling, our machines, our careless probing into the earth are not just disturbances, but signals? Signals that reach beyond us, knocking against the stone doors. And what if the vaults, in turn, are beginning to knock back? I think of the glow again, that shifting light I saw in the fissure. What if that was not an accident, but an answer? If so, then it was not the first reply, merely the first one I was foolish enough to notice. How many other answers have gone unseen, dismissed as heat shimmer, as seismic hums, as coincidence? Perhaps the world is thick with them, and we move blindly through the replies of mountains, unaware we're in conversation with something older than ourselves. It chills me because conversation implies eventual understanding. And what happens when that understanding arrives? Do we meet as kin, inheritors of their silence, or do we meet as trespassers, tolerated only until the patience of stone runs out. The locks hold for now, but if we are indeed part of a dialogue with the fire, then silence may be running short. The pause is ending. And when the reply comes in full, it may not be words we hear, but fire itself. That thought turns every eruption into a message. The fountains of lava, the walls of ash, the thunder of stone collapsing into molten rivers. What if all of it is speech? Language expressed in a tongue too immense for us to grasp. We stand at a distance, staring at the spectacle, recording readings and measurements, but perhaps we are only scribes at the edge of a vast conversation, and if fire is the reply, then what exactly are we the question to? I walked once through the ruins of Pompeii, where the ash has preserved not only bodies but gestures. A hand reaching, a face turned upward, a figure shielding a child. Everyone sees them as a frozen moment of catastrophe. But what if they are also witnesses, forever caught in the moment when the vault pushed back? What did they see in that instant before the ash swallowed them? Was it fire alone, or something within the fire? Their silence screams louder than any myth, and every time I walk among those shapes, I feel like I'm trespassing on testimony I cannot yet translate. The stillness after eruptions unnerves me most. Villages fall silent, animals refuse to graze. Even the wind feels restrained. Survivors often describe a strange quiet, like the mountain inhaling after an exhalation too powerful to sustain. That silence feels deliberate, as though, after speaking, the earth waits for our reply, but we have none to give. Or perhaps, in our digging and drilling, we have been replying all along without knowing it. The deeper I go into these thoughts, the more fragile my own sense of identity becomes. If volcanoes are tombs, then what am I? A witness? A trespasser? Or worse, a messenger? Perhaps by noticing, by speaking these things aloud, I am carrying their language further than it was meant to go. That realization unsettles me, because silence might not only protect the world from them, it might also protect them from us. One night on the slopes of Mount Nyiragongo, I stood at the edge of its boiling lava lake, a sight both mesmerizing and terrifying. The liquid earth moved like muscle, glowing and folding in patterns too precise to be random. It felt like staring at the heartbeat of something vast. The scientist beside me murmured under his breath, "It's alive." He meant it metaphorically, but the words carried a weight he did not intend. Because in that moment it did feel alive. It felt aware. And if awareness dwells in the fire, then what is it aware of? Us? Time? The locks themselves? I cannot escape the suspicion that the eruptions are not simply accidents of geology, but responses to provocation. Each time humanity grows too bold, too numerous, too disruptive, the mountain reminds us of the limits of our dominion. Entire cities swallowed, entire kingdoms erased. Not random, but targeted. Perhaps the fire is selective, choosing moments when the silence must be restored. The psychological burden of this realization is heavy. We pride ourselves on being builders, on shaping the world to fit our will. But what if we are not the architects we believe ourselves to be? What if we are merely tenants, living on land that belongs to something else? Something that tolerates us only so long as we do not tamper with the locks? And what if, in our arrogance, we are already tampering too much? I carry that dread with me always now, especially when I hear of new drilling projects near volcanic zones. Every borehole, every tunnel, every shaft carved into living stone feels like a hand rattling a lock, and the locks, I fear, are patient, but not eternal. So I ask myself the question that keeps me awake long after the tremors fade. When the fire finally replies without restraint, will it be an answer we can survive, or a sentence already decided? That line cuts through every thought I've carried because it suggests finality. If eruptions are replies, then perhaps the world's conversation with itself has always been less about balance and more about verdicts. And what if those verdicts are not arbitrary? What if the fire has always been judging civilizations, weighing them in silence until the moment comes to strike? The possibility reframes every catastrophe we know, Pompeii, Tambora, Krakatoa, not as chance, but as choices. The third great twist struck me during a visit to archives in Rome. Hidden among reports of earthquakes and famines was a document written by a monk in the 13th century. He described Etna erupting with such force that the mountain did not vomit stone, but voices. He wrote of hearing chants in a language no one understood, echoing in the thunder of the eruption. He claimed the townspeople fell to their knees, not in fear of lava, but in reverence for what they believed were the cries of an imprisoned host. His superior dismissed it as hysteria, but the words rang with conviction. And what chilled me most was his closing line. "We are not the first to hear them, and we will not be the last." That phrase unravelled me. If monks centuries ago believed they were hearing something alive beneath the fire, then our modern interpretations of natural disaster are not evolution of understanding, but denial. A refusal to accept that what is sealed might not be gone, only waiting. And if humanity has always heard them, across ages, then the silence is not absolute. The locks leak. It is in those leaks, those voices, chants, glows and rhythms that the danger lies. Because what if the purpose of the locks is not just to contain, but to prevent recognition? Perhaps the fire's true role is to blur memory, to keep us from connecting fragments across continents and centuries. Myths scattered here, frescoes preserved there, voices heard elsewhere, all just shards of a mirror we are forbidden to reassemble. And yet here I am, piecing them together, wondering if I am doing exactly what the fire has fought to stop. Psychologically, this realization is unbearable. I feel complicit, as though by asking these questions, by dragging fragments of story into the light, I am knocking on the vaults myself. It is one thing to study stone. It is another to wonder if the stone listens back. I begin to sense eyes in the smoke, ears in the tremors, awareness in the silence. My rational mind pushes it aside, but the feeling remains heavy and unshakable. The mountains notice. I remember standing on the rim of Vesuvius, looking down into its yawning throat. The air was warm, even in winter, the earth faintly trembling beneath my boots. A guide beside me muttered, almost to himself, "It doesn't like to be watched." The simplicity of his statement sent a chill through me. If the mountain does not like to be watched, then perhaps all our science, all our probing, all our restless attention is not discovery but provocation. And so the twist deepens. We are not the first to find this place, and we are not the first to vanish. Civilizations before us may have uncovered fragments just as we have. They may have listened too long, watched too closely, asked too many questions. And then, when their silence was demanded, the fire consumed them. The locks remain for now, but the more I uncover, the more I feel the balance tipping. Perhaps the vaults cannot stay closed forever. Perhaps they were never meant to. And if that is true, then what waits beyond the fire may already be stirring, listening for the moment when the world forgets fear long enough to open the door. That sentence echoes inside me like a seismic wave. The thought that something stirs beneath the crust, aware of us, waiting for our distraction, shifts everything I believed about history, geology, even time itself. It means that the locks are not only about containment, they are about delay. Not forever, but long enough. Long enough for civilizations to rise, to believe themselves sovereign, and then to fall when the door begins to give way. The third major twist came not in myth or dream, but in the words of a scientist, a volcanologist who studied harmonic tremors beneath Mount St. Helens, He confided that some of the frequencies recorded were unlike anything they had catalogued before. Not random, not chaotic, but structured, like repeating phrases. When he first suggested it at a conference, his colleagues dismissed him. Anthropomorphizing data, they called it. But in private he admitted, sometimes it sounds like a chant. A chant. The word struck me like thunder, because centuries earlier a monk had written of voices erupting from Etna, thousands of miles apart, hundreds of years apart. The same description. If the fire carries chants, then the vaults are not silent. They are restless. They are practicing their reply. And what unnerves me most is how subtle these leaks are. Not overwhelming, not undeniable, but faint, scattered, easy to dismiss. Enough for the rational mind to say coincidence, enough for the cautious heart to whisper otherwise. It is a pattern, designed to test us. Do we remember, or do we deny? And if we deny, does that embolden what lies beneath? Psychologically, it is suffocating. I find myself analysing every tremor as if it were a syllable, every eruption as if it were punctuation. I wonder if the entire world is a manuscript written in fire, and we are too blind to see the grammar. And if that is true, then perhaps the story is already written. We are merely characters, living out chapters that others long ago dictated. The deeper I sink into this thought, the more the past reframes itself. What if Atlantis, long dismissed as myth, was not sunk by the sea but sealed in fire? What if the sunken cities described in legend are not beneath water but beneath molten stone? Perhaps we have been looking in the wrong place all along. Civilizations didn't vanish into the ocean. They were buried alive, hidden in volcanic tombs where water could not touch them, where only fire could serve as a lock strong enough to hold. I walked once through the lava tubes of Lanzarote, their walls smooth and glassy, their silence so complete it felt like being swallowed. Standing there, I imagined those voids not as natural formations but as corridors, remnants of something carved before the eruption filled them. And then I wondered, how many such passages lie beneath us, unseen, mistaken for geological quirks? How many doors have already been buried so deep we will never know they existed? The twist is brutal. We weren't the first to find this place, and we weren't the first to vanish. Entire ages may have discovered fragments, just as we have, only to be consumed when they drew too close. We inherit their whispers, their scattered myths, without realizing they are warnings carved in time. And yet, we repeat the cycle. We dig, we probe, we listen, daring the locks to answer us. So the question now sharpens into a blade. Are we uncovering the past, or are we summoning the future? Because if the vaults are stirring, then history is not behind us. It is beneath us, pressing upward, waiting for its turn to rise again. That thought refuses to let me rest. It forces me to see the earth not as a settled stage, but as a layered archive, where each stratum hides not only fossils and stones, but entire, forgotten epochs. What we call history may just be the thinner skin of the world's memory, while beneath it, older stories press upward like molten rock. If the vaults are stirring, then perhaps what we know as human civilization is nothing but an interlude between awakenings. The more I consider this, the more every eruption feels like a test, a reminder. The mountain breathes out fire, and the world above takes notice, but few dare to ask what the exhale means. To most, it is destruction. To me, it is signal. Every time the ground cracks, every time red light spills into the night sky, I cannot help but feel we are being warned, or perhaps beckoned. I think back to the strange light I saw in the fissure, the glow that pulsed with a rhythm too human, too deliberate. What if that was not just a fragment of energy, but a hand against the lock pressing outward? If so, then the vaults are no longer still. They are restless, and restlessness is a prelude to awakening. In the Andes, shamans speak of sleepers in the stone, beings who stir when the mountains move. They do not describe them as gods, but as ancestors who are not ours. That phrase unsettled me. Ancestors who are not ours, a contradiction, and yet it holds a terrifying logic. Civilizations buried long before ours, civilizations with no relation to us, might yet see themselves as the rightful inheritors of the earth. And if the locks open, will they view us as children of the same world, or as trespassers occupying land that was never truly ours? The psychology of trespass is haunting. Imagine moving through a house you thought was abandoned, only to realise its owners are still inside, watching. That is how the world feels to me now. We build, we mine, we claim ownership of earth and sky. But what if those who were here before never truly left? What if they are only waiting for the vaults to break to reclaim what they once held? There is a peculiar consistency in the myths. In Iceland, giants beneath the mountains. In Japan, fiery kings. In Central America, gods swallowed by the earth. Different names, different stories, yet all agree on one thing. Those within will rise again. They are not gone, they are sealed. That distinction is everything. It transforms fire from accident into design, from chaos into a system of containment. And that system may not hold much longer. Science tells us volcanic activity is increasing in recent decades. More eruptions, more tremors, more restless mountains. The rational explanation is tectonic shifts, climate change, cycles of pressure. But what if it is not only geology? What if the locks themselves are weakening, strained by time, by our interference, by something beyond our comprehension? I find myself staring at the maps of active volcanoes, noticing how many lie near human settlements, near great cities. Naples beneath Vesuvius, Quito beside Pichincha. Entire nations built in the shadow of fire. Were we drawn to these places unconsciously, sensing their hidden importance? Or have we been lured, called to live above the very vaults that may one day open? The thought twists deeper. Perhaps we are not just bystanders. Perhaps we are part of the ritual, part of the pattern. Civilizations raised to keep the locks sealed, then erased when our purpose is done. It is a cruel thought, but it explains the rhythm of history. Rise, flourish, vanish. Each cycle another layer above the vaults, another generation guarding the silence without ever knowing it. So I return to the same fear, heavier now than before. If the vaults are stirring, then it is not only history that waits beneath us, it is judgment. And if it is judgment, then the question is no longer whether the locks will break, but whether we deserve to survive when they do. That thought keeps me awake in the long hours before dawn, when the world is too quiet and every creak of the earth sounds like a prelude. Deserving to survive is not something we often consider. We take survival as our right, our inheritance as the dominant species of this planet. But what if it isn't? What if survival is a privilege granted conditionally, cycle by cycle, by forces older than memory? Perhaps civilizations are tested, not by wars or famines, but by the mountains themselves, the keepers of judgment waiting to see if we've learned anything at all. The more I explore, the more I notice that every eruption leaves two kinds of marks: devastation and revelation. Yes, towns are burned, lives are ended, but also new land emerges, new soil, new artifacts pulled from the past. It is as though destruction and disclosure are inseparable, twin gestures of the same hand. The fire takes, but it also shows, which means it is not blind. It chooses. I remember walking across the hardened flows of Paricutin in Mexico, a volcano that rose overnight from the farmer's field. Entire villages were entombed in less than a year. The church spire of San Juan still juts from the stone, a single reminder of the life buried beneath. Locals tell stories of hearing bells from the sealed church long after it was consumed. Science calls it imagination. But what if it wasn't? What if those bells were echoes, not of people trapped, but of something deeper, something pushing memory back into the world above? The psychology of judgment frightens me most. If the fire is more than chance, if it truly weighs civilizations, then what criteria does it use? Morality? Balance with the earth? Or simply time? The inexorable rhythm of rise and fall? And if we are next in line, what verdict would we receive? Would the vaults open to let us join those sealed before? Or would they open to replace us with whatever lies beneath? In Bali, I once spoke to a dancer whose family had performed rituals for generations at the foot of Mount Agung. She told me something simple but chilling. We dance so the mountain remembers us kindly. It was not just tradition, it was negotiation. The people knew the mountain was not inert. They believed it held memory, even preference. That struck me harder than any scientific data, because it implied relationship. The vaults do not simply exist beneath us. They are in dialogue with us, and dialogue means consequences. And here lies the unbearable truth. If eruptions are verdicts, then perhaps our myths have always been attempts to plead with the judge. Offerings, rituals, dances, sacrifices, all ways of trying to soften the fire to remind the mountain we are listening that we are willing to live under its gaze. But what if the verdict has already been written? What if every civilization dances, prays, builds and hopes in vain, only to be sealed when the time comes? I cannot escape the feeling that our own world trembles on the edge of such a verdict. The mountains grow restless, eruptions increase, signs accumulate. Perhaps it is only geology. But what if it isn't? What if we are already standing in the shadow of the next vault, the next cycle of judgment, unaware that our place in history is nearly at its end? And so the question deepens, cutting sharper than before. When the locks break, will they open to welcome us as part of a greater continuum, or will they open to erase us completely? Another forgotten layer in the Earth's burning archive. The weight of that question lingers in my chest like ash in the lungs. To imagine the future as nothing more than a footnote, a layer of char beneath the soil of some future age, is to confront our fragility in ways no war or famine ever could. Those disasters, though terrible, still belong to the human world. But fire from the vaults? That belongs to something older, something beyond us, something that does not recognize our boundaries of nations or faiths. It consumes without prejudice. It erases entire tapestries at once. And yet, within that terror lies a darker possibility. That the vaults are not indifferent, but intentional. If civilizations are sealed and judged, then erasure is not simply accident but decision. Which forces me to ask, what would make us unworthy? What pattern are we repeating that calls the fire closer with every passing decade? History provides fragments, each unsettling. The Minoans on Crete, destroyed in the shadow of Thera's eruption. The Olmecs, whose colossal heads now sit alone in jungles that once teemed with life. The Indus Valley, where an entire urban network dissolved, leaving only bricks and unanswered questions. Too many vanishings orbit volcanic activity to be coincidence, each one a civilization convinced of its permanence, brought low in a single generation, each one buried so thoroughly it takes centuries for us to even find their remains. And then I think of us, billions of people living on the slopes of vaults, Mexico City beneath Popocatépetl, Tokyo near Fuji, entire nations resting atop calderas like Yellowstone or Toba. It is as though humanity cannot resist building its greatest dreams directly above its greatest threats. A compulsion, perhaps, or a summons. The psychology of summons is difficult to ignore. We speak of mountains as sacred, of fire as divine, of eruptions as both curse and blessing. Could it be that deep within we're drawn toward the vaults, not in ignorance but in recognition? Perhaps civilizations settle near fire because they sense its centrality, its ancient authority. To live far from the vaults might feel safe, but it may also feel disconnected, cut off from the pulse of something fundamental. So we return to the shadow of the fire again and again, even knowing it may consume us. If that is true, then humanity's instinct is not survival, but participation. We're not only witnesses to the cycle, we are actors in it, willingly climbing the stage that will one day collapse beneath us. Our cities, our monuments, our lives may simply be the ornaments of a ritual older than we can comprehend. And when the time comes, the ritual demands erasure. This thought gnaws at me as I stare at the glowing maps of magma chambers beneath the crust. They are not random. They form patterns, arcs, belts, like a web stretched across the world. The ring of fire encircling the Pacific is not merely tectonic collision. It feels orchestrated, deliberate, as though the locks are arranged with symmetry only hidden until seen from above. If these vaults are linked, then when one stirs, others may stir as well. And if they open together, the world will not be erased in fragments, but in chorus. The slow dread comes with the realization that we may already be inside the verdict. Eruptions grow stronger, ash clouds spread wider, tremors ripple farther, the locks are shifting, the door is moving. Perhaps survival is no longer a question of deserving, but of timing. Perhaps the vaults do not open when we fail, but when they are ready. And so the silence before the fire feels less like peace, and more like the intake of breath, before a word spoken too loudly to ignore. And if that word is spoken, it will not be a whisper, but a roar, one that carries not knowledge or mercy, but a memory we were never meant to survive. The image of that roar plays endlessly in my mind. Not the sound of fire-consuming stone, nor the rumble of mountains splitting open, but something deeper, something more deliberate. A roar that is less destruction than declaration. A voice of the vaults, rising not to inform us, but to remind us. What could such a reminder be? Perhaps that we are not the first, nor the last, but simply the latest in a procession of civilizations buried and unburied by fire. I recall a strange inscription I once saw etched into basalt fragments near Vesuvius, markings dismissed by scholars as graffiti from a Roman hand. Yet the symbols had nothing of Rome in them. They resembled older signs, patterns of spirals and intersecting lines found in distant places, in Crete, in Malta, in the Andes. The archaeologists smiled at my questions. Coincidence, they said. But I couldn't shake the suspicion that those marks were warnings left by a people who had faced the roar before, etched into stone, knowing the fire might erase all else. If that is true, then we are not merely imagining the vaults as prisons. They may have been known as such for millennia. Knowledge buried, rediscovered, forgotten, and buried again. Perhaps every cycle ends with fire and begins with ignorance. And in that cycle, memory itself is the first casualty. What use is wisdom if it is sealed beneath molten rock, hidden until too late? Psychologically, I wrestle with the idea that the roar is not for us at all. It may not be meant to teach, to guide, or to punish. It may simply be the sound of release, the exhalation of whatever has been held within for too long. Imagine a vault sealed for tens of thousands of years, pressure mounting, fire straining against stone. When it breaks, the sound will not be language, it will be liberation. But liberation of what? That is the question that keeps me pacing in empty rooms long after midnight. Are these vaults guardians of lost civilizations, entombed until some future rising? Or are they containers of something far less human? Beings whose forms could not walk under sunlight without reshaping our world entirely. If the latter, then perhaps our civilizations are not judged but sacrificed, burnt away to keep the locks from opening fully. each cycle a fire break, each erasure a way of buying more time. There is a cruel logic in that thought. Humanity builds, flourishes, and eventually burns, not because we fail, but because our erasure feeds the mechanism that keeps the vaults closed. If so, then our destiny has never been survival. Our destiny has been service. We are the layer of ash between the locks and the light. And yet, a part of me refuses that conclusion. What if the roar, when it comes, is not annihilation but unveiling? What if we are meant to hear it, to recognise it, to finally remember what those before us forgot? Could it be that the vaults have been trying to speak for ages, and only now do we have the capacity to listen? If that is so, then perhaps the fire is not the end of civilizations, but the beginning of memory. Perhaps the roar carries with it images, truths, a flood of awareness strong enough to shatter the amnesia of cycles. And perhaps that flood is what terrifies us most. The possibility that what we learn in that moment will change not only our place in history, but our very sense of what it means to exist. So I ask again, though the answer chills me, is the roar destruction, or is it revelation? The question claws at me with a persistence that feels almost alive. I hear it in the silence before dawn. I feel it in the subtle tremors that pass unnoticed by most. And sometimes I even think I glimpse its answer in dreams, though the images never survive waking. If it is destruction, then everything we know is fragile beyond measure, a sandcastle waiting for the tide. But if it is revelation, then perhaps fragility is only the surface of something deeper, a mask concealing truths we have long denied ourselves. I keep circling back to an ancient Polynesian chant recorded in fragments by early sailors. The words are obscure, distorted through translation, but one line stands clear. When the mountain sings, the world remembers. The phrasing is peculiar. Not the people remember, not the gods remember, but the world remembers. As if the roar is not only an act of release, but of recollection, a memory stored in stone, flowing outward in fire. Could the earth itself be the archive, each volcano a locked chapter of its own biography, waiting for the moment it must be read aloud? If so, then the civilizations buried by eruptions are not simply victims. They are participants, woven into the memory itself. Their destruction becomes their preservation paradoxically. Their stories are not lost. They are carried downward, sealed into the vault until the day the lock opens. But this idea terrifies me more than erasure. Because if memory is preserved in fire, then everything, the triumphs, the failures, the cruelties, will come rushing back together in a single instant. No filtering, no forgetting. Just the raw weight of all that ever was. Could humanity endure such a flood? Or would revelation itself be the deadliest fire? The psychology of this is unbearable. We are creatures built on forgetting. Empires crumble and we move on. Atrocities scar generations and then fade into textbooks. Even our personal lives depend on selective amnesia. Grief dulled, shame buried, pain softened by the erosion of memory. But what if the vaults deny us that escape? What if the roar is refusal to let forgetting win? To force the living to carry not only their own history, but the history of every age sealed before them. I find myself shivering at the thought of such weight, pressing into the human mind. Perhaps that is why civilization collapse after fire, not because their fields are burned, but because their minds are overloaded with memory not meant to be born. Revelation becomes paralysis, and so the cycle resets. Survivors stagger forward stripped of knowledge, their descendants beginning again in ignorance, never knowing what truth consumed their forebears. And yet, if this cycle is real, then it cannot be coincidence that we stand where we do now, at the edge of vaults growing restless, armed with technologies that, for the first time, might allow us to map, to interpret, to withstand. Perhaps this is the moment we are meant to endure the flood, Perhaps this is the test that no civilization before us passed. But then another thought intrudes, darker than the rest. What if the flood of memory is not for us at all? What if the roar is addressed to something else, something beneath or beyond us, a signal, a call, an awakening? We may imagine revelation for ourselves, but perhaps we are only the medium, the conduit through which memory travels to its true recipient. If so, then all our stories, all our civilizations, all our vaults of stone are nothing more than messages written in ash for eyes we cannot imagine. So the question sharpens once more. Unbearable in its simplicity, is the roar for us or through us? That question burns hotter than the magma itself. If the roar is for us, then there is still meaning in its violence, still some thread of communication, a chance that the fire holds wisdom even if it shatters us. But if it is through us, then we are nothing more than channels, fragile vessels carrying signals not meant for our comprehension. That thought unsettles me most of all. To imagine humanity reduced to mere parchment in a message written in flame. I think again of those basalt markings I once saw near Vesuvius. Symbols repeated across continents, across oceans, separated by ages that should not have allowed such consistency. They do not resemble alphabets so much as instructions, or perhaps coordinates. What if every eruption is not random, but aligned with a sequence, a rhythm, a coded pulse sent across time? Not messages to us, but messages using us. A civilization rises, flourishes, and then burns, each layer of ash carrying some imprint into the vaults below, sealed into the archive until the locks turn again. And in that turning, what awakens? Could the vaults themselves be aware, remembering through fire, shaping through destruction? Or is there something beyond them, waiting for the cycle to complete, receiving each eruption like one listens to words in a language stretched across millennia? If so, then what is it learning from us, and what has it already decided? The psychological weight of being only a conduit is unbearable. For centuries, philosophers have told us we are the centre of meaning, the architects of our own fate. But if our civilizations are nothing more than brushstrokes in an older design, then our choices may be little more than decoration on a page written long before us. And yet, strangely, this thought carries not only dread, but also relief. If we are channels, then the burden of destiny may not be ours alone to bear. Perhaps survival was never the point. Perhaps the point was continuity, the thread unbroken even if the fabric burns. But still, the human mind resists. We are not content to be parchment. We demand to be readers as well. And so I return to the possibility of revelation. What if the roar is both for us and through us? A double voice, layered in fire, speaking to whatever lies beyond while also forcing us to confront truths we would never choose to face. Truths about our origin, about the cycles that repeat, about the meaning of civilizations swallowed in ash. I cannot help but wonder if this duality explains the myths that echo around volcanoes. Stories of gods hidden beneath mountains, of titans chained in fire, of underworlds guarded by gates of stone. Cultures separated by oceans imagined nearly the same thing, that the mountain is not only dangerous but inhabited, alive with voices too immense to belong to man. These myths may not be fantasies, but fragments of memory leaking from the roar itself, distorted into stories we could endure without shattering. And here lies the most disquieting thought of all. If memory leaks, then perhaps so too does intention. Maybe civilizations build near vaults not only because of fertile soil or sacred ore, but because something beneath draws them in, summons them closer, positioning them precisely where they must be when the locks turn again. If so, then none of our choices were ever ours. The vaults chose the ground, the cycle chose the time, and we merely played our parts. I try to dismiss this, but the feeling lingers every time I stare into the glowing mouth of a crater. The sense of being observed, measured, weighed, as though the vaults are not silent at all, but waiting, watching, listening for the moment we're ready to carry the roar once more. And if they are listening, then the question becomes unbearable. What have they already heard in us, and what are they waiting to hear next? That question is not one you can silence once it lodges in the mind. It curls around thought like smoke, filling every chamber with unease. If the vaults are listening, then perhaps they are not passive archives at all. Perhaps they are responsive, reacting not to the shifting of tectonic plates, but to the chorus of our voices, our actions, our civilizations. And if that is true, then maybe what we call eruptions are not accidents of geology, but answers to questions we did not even know we had asked. I think of the chants recorded around Mount Etna, voices lifted into the night before an eruption, as though the villagers were speaking directly to the mountain. Were they praying for mercy, or were they conducting a dialogue? Myths often describe sacrifices, offerings hurled into the fire to quiet the fury. But what if those sacrifices were not gestures of desperation, but attempts at communication? The roar of the volcano would not then be rage but reply, its molten words written in rivers of flame. It unsettles me to imagine the earth itself as a participant in conversation, vast, patient, immeasurably old, speaking in a language too immense for us to fully grasp. Yet fragments break through, like whispers caught between storms, patterns in eruptions, symbols carved into basalt, songs heard in tremors, and each fragment presses me toward a single possibility. The vaults are not tombs alone. They are interlocutors. But what could they want from us? And what could we possibly say that would matter to them? Perhaps it is not content they crave, but resonance. They may be waiting not for knowledge, but for harmony, for the sound of a civilization that finally aligns with the frequency of the earth itself. Every culture swallowed by fire might have failed, not because it was weak, but because it spoke in the wrong key, carried dissonance into the vault. And so the locks turned, the fire erased, the cycle reset. The psychology of this idea is devastating. To imagine that survival depends not on power, not on technology, not even on morality, but on resonance. Something far more elusive, something that cannot be manufactured by force. If this is true, then humanity's fate is not determined by strength, but by the music of its soul. And what, then, is the music of our age? Is it harmony, or is it noise? When the vaults listen to us, do they hear a chorus or a cacophony? I cannot shake the thought that perhaps we have already been weighed. Perhaps the silence of some volcanoes is not mercy, but judgment delayed. Waiting, listening, testing whether we will shift our tune or remain bound to discord. And if we fail, the locks will open once more, the vaults will reply, and everything we know will be rewritten in ash. Yet part of me wonders if that judgment, when it comes, will not be punishment, but transformation. If the roar is revelation, then maybe those who vanish in fire do not perish entirely, but become part of the memory, absorbed into the vault, added to the song. Civilizations do not end, they join the choir. It is a terrifying comfort, annihilation as inclusion, destruction as belonging. But if that is true, then another question rises, darker than the rest. Who leads that choir now? If civilizations swallowed before us became voices in the vault, then what songs do they sing beneath the mountains? Are they pleading for release? Or are they calling us closer, urging us into the fire so that we too may join their endless refrain? The thought chills me more than the heat of any eruption, because if the vaults already have a choir, then we are not facing silence, we are facing invitation. That realization changes everything. If the vaults are not merely dormant graves, not blind furnaces of stone and fire, but doorways extending invitations, then every eruption is no longer destruction. It is beckoning, an opening, a hand extended though made of flame. Humanity has always feared the volcano as an executioner, but what if it has always been something closer to a host, summoning us toward its hidden halls, and suddenly so many pieces fall into place. The strange persistence of settlements near volcanoes despite the constant risk. The myths that describe them as entrances to other realms. The stories of chosen ones walking into fire and returning transformed, sometimes even as prophets or rulers. What if those were not just symbolic tales, but fragments of encounters? People who accepted the invitation and stepped into the vault, returning not destroyed but altered by what they had seen. The twist, of course, is this. The vaults may not be asking all of us. Perhaps the invitations are selective, extended only when humanity nears some threshold, when the resonance aligns enough for the door to open. And then, rather than swallow an entire civilization at once, the fire calls forward a few emissaries, testing them, reshaping them, sending them back as messengers. Messengers we may have ignored, reduced to myth, silenced as madmen. It would explain the uncanny patterns in ancient records. Leaders who emerged from obscurity, bearing knowledge far beyond their time, only to vanish as suddenly as they appeared. Cultures whose architecture mirrors volcanic geometry, whose temples mimic the shape of craters. Entire societies seemed to have been built as if answering to instructions too immense to come from human imagination alone. Perhaps those were not inventions, but echoes, blueprints given during moments when the invitation was accepted. But if this is so, then the invitation is not without danger. For every figure who may have returned, how many never emerged? How many walked into the flame and joined the choir beneath, swallowed not by accident, but by acceptance? It forces me to rethink the very idea of destruction. The eruption is not only a purge, not only a cleansing, it is also a recruitment. Civilizations erased may not be gone at all. They may have been taken, incorporated, drawn into the vault's endless memory until they were no longer distinguishable as separate voices. The fire, then, is not enemy or ally. It is threshold. And thresholds are not meant to be safe. They are meant to separate what belongs on one side from what belongs on the other. If we stand now before such a threshold, then humanity must decide. Do we refuse the invitation and risk being erased entirely, or do we step forward into fire, gambling everything on the promise of transformation? The more I dwell on this, the more I realise the invitation is not abstract. It is present, alive, humming beneath the crust of every quiet volcano. And if we are indeed reaching another turning in the cycle, then the next eruption may not be catastrophe alone. It may be announcement, a call to whoever listens closely enough to recognise it not as death, but as passage. And here lies the chilling final twist. They had not left us ruins or myths or even warnings. They had left us the vaults themselves, eternal and unyielding, waiting with patience beyond comprehension. Not tombs, not prisons, but invitations written in fire, sealed until we were ready to choose whether to answer them. The question is no longer whether the vaults exist, nor whether they hold memory. The question is whether we will accept the invitation, knowing that entry means leaving behind everything we have ever known. The words ring like a tolling bell, deep and mournful, yet steady. To cross such a boundary is not simply to risk life, but to surrender identity. Everything that has defined us, our languages, our histories, our fragile boundaries of nation and tribe, would fall away once we stepped into the flame. That is why the invitation terrifies me, because it is not addressed to humanity as it is, but to what humanity might become after fire has stripped us of all else. I think of the civilizations swallowed before us. Did they resist the invitation, clinging to their walls and temples until molten rivers swept them away? Or did some of them accept, walking willingly into eruption, choosing transformation over annihilation? We cannot know for certain, and yet the myths suggest both possibilities. Some stories tell of peoples destroyed for hubris, others of chosen ones carried into realms of light. These myths do not contradict one another. They describe the same event from two sides of the threshold. Those who stayed saw only death. Those who crossed saw something else. And what of us? If our era faces the same choice, then our struggles with technology, with the fragile balance of our planet, with our ceaseless noise and haste, perhaps all of it is already being weighed. The vaults do not listen to speeches or treaties. They listen to resonance. Do we, as a species, speak in harmony or in discord? Our towers of glass and steel might mean nothing if the song we send into the earth is one of chaos. It forces me to look inward. What song do I carry? What rhythm do I add to the chorus? If the vaults open tomorrow, what will they hear in me? A frequency that strengthens harmony or one that fractures it? In truth, I do not know. None of us do. That is the terror and the hope. That judgment does not come from outside, but from within, reflected back to us in flame. I begin to understand why ancient peoples built temples on volcanic slopes, why they sang into the night knowing destruction could come at any moment. They were rehearsing, not only for survival, but for acceptance. They wanted to be heard clearly, to add their voices in unity before the vault made its choice. To live so close to fire was an act of faith, but also of preparation. We, however, live far from that intimacy. We bury our awareness under layers of concrete, drown silence in machines, and treat eruptions as accidents rather than messages. Perhaps that is why the invitation feels more dangerous for us. We are less prepared to hear it, and even less prepared to answer. And yet, the earth waits with a patience beyond measure. It has time. It has always had time. The vaults do not rush. They will wait until the moment arrives when the resonance demands reply. What unsettles me most is that this may not come as a single eruption, or a singular moment. It may come as a slow gathering, a rising of whispers in tremors, a swelling in the air we breathe, a deepening silence before the roar. It may already have begun, and if so, then every choice we make now, every chord we strike in the symphony of existence, may be part of the song the vaults are listening to. It leaves me with one final thought, not of dread, but of haunting possibility. If fire is invitation, then perhaps acceptance is not end, but beginning. Perhaps the civilizations before us didn't vanish at all. Perhaps they are still here, their voices layered in the vault, waiting for ours to join. If that is true, then the vaults are not graves but choirs, and the eruption is not destruction but overture. If that is true, then every civilization erased by fire may not have been lost but transformed. Their stones turned to glass, their voices carried into the vault, their essence woven into an endless resonance that waits, patient and unbroken. And if this is the overture, then what comes after may not be silence, but the beginning of a greater movement, a symphony of worlds that we cannot yet imagine. I find myself asking dangerous questions. What if the vaults are not simply listening, but composing, shaping the resonance of each age into a single score? What if the earth itself is the conductor, choosing which voices to preserve and which to silence? And if so, do we truly have freedom? Or are we only players in a music that has always been written beneath our feet? The thought is terrifying, and yet comforting. To be part of something vast is to lose the illusion of control, but it is also to belong. Perhaps that is why ancient civilizations seemed so ready to offer themselves to the fire. They did not see it as death, but as entry into something larger than any one tribe or city. They saw the eruption as a passage, a door through which their people could step into eternity. And so I wonder about us. If the vaults open in our time, will we hear them? Or will our noise, our endless machines, our restless movement drown out the invitation until the overture passes us by? Could it be that our greatest danger is not destruction, but deafness? the inability to hear the call when it comes. The air feels heavy with possibility, as though the vaults are already humming with questions we cannot yet answer. If we are to endure, perhaps it will not be through power, or walls, or technology, but through harmony, through finding the frequency that aligns us with the greater music of the earth. And here, at the end of this journey, I leave the questions with you. If volcanoes are not graves but choirs, whose voices are they still carrying? Could the overture of the earth be waiting for us to take our place in the song? Or have we already missed the first notes, lost in the static of our own age? Share your thoughts below, and if you're new here, subscribe to Planet Echoes so you don't miss the next chapter in the hidden history of our world.